Oprah Winfrey's life is often told as one of the most remarkable success stories in modern media history. A journey from extreme poverty to global influence, from a child with no certainty of safety or stability to a woman whose voice shaped television, culture, and even public policy. But beneath the surface of awards, wealth, and record-breaking achievements lies a far more complex human story. It is a story shaped not only by ambition and talent, but also by survival, resilience, and the long emotional aftermath of early trauma. Her rise did not happen in isolation from her past. In many ways, it was built directly upon it. Born in the segregated American South in the mid-20th century, Oprah's early environment was defined by scarcity and hardship. Opportunities were rare, and vulnerability was constant. Yet, even as a child, she displayed an unusual intelligence and an early affinity for communication traits that would eventually become the foundation of her career. However, her childhood was also marked by instability and experiences of abuse that would leave lasting emotional scars. This is not simply a narrative of success, but of contradiction. Immense public achievement alongside private struggle, global admiration alongside personal loneliness, an empowerment that was hard, won through pain. Understanding Oprah Winfrey's legacy requires acknowledging both sides of her life, the extraordinary influence she achieved, and the deeply human cost that came with it. Early life in Mississippi, poverty, structure, and isolation. Oprah Winfrey was born in rural Mississippi in 1954 into conditions of extreme poverty. Her early years were shaped by a fragmented family structure and constant movement between caregivers. Her mother worked long hours in domestic service, while her father was largely absent in her earliest years. As a result, Oprah spent much of her childhood under the care of her grandmother, who provided both discipline and early literacy instruction. Life on her grandmother's farm was harsh but formative. Basic necessities were limited, and material comfort was virtually non-existent. Clothing was often handmade from inexpensive materials, and toys or entertainment were rare. However, her grandmother introduced her to reading at a very young age, using religious texts as a foundation for literacy. This early exposure to language became a crucial turning point, offering Oprah both escape and intellectual stimulation. Despite the structure her grandmother provided, Oprah experienced isolation. She was a sensitive and observant child, often turning inward and relying on imagination and reading to cope with her environment. When she later moved to live with her mother in an urban setting, the transition introduced new challenges, including instability and emotional distance within the household. These early experiences created a dual reality for her, one of intellectual potential and emotional vulnerability existing simultaneously. Childhood trauma and emotional consequences. As Oprah entered her preteen years, her life became increasingly unstable. During this period, she experienced repeated abuse within her extended environment, a reality that would later be publicly acknowledged in adulthood. These experiences had profound psychological consequences, particularly for a child who lacked the emotional and structural support needed to process them. The abuse was compounded by silence and confusion. Like many children in similar circumstances, she did not initially have the language or understanding to fully comprehend what was happening to her. This led to internalized shame and misplaced self-blame, an emotional burden that would remain with her for years. The absence of consistent protection or intervention from trusted adults deepened her sense of isolation. During this time, school became one of her few stable environments. Academically, she excelled, often performing far above her grade level in reading and communication. Teachers recognized her intelligence and potential, even when her personal life reflected instability. This contrast between outward academic promise and internal emotional distress became a defining feature of her early development. The psychological impact of these experiences did not disappear with time. Instead, they became embedded in her identity, influencing her later drive, emotional sensitivity, and desire to create spaces where others could speak openly about trauma. Adolescence, father's household, and early responsibility at a critical point in her teenage years, Oprah moved to live with her father in Nashville. This transition marked a significant shift in her environment. Unlike the instability of earlier years, her father's household was structured, disciplined, and focused on achievement. Expectations were clear and accountability was strict. While this environment could feel demanding, it also provided something she had previously lacked: consistency. Her father emphasized education and personal responsibility, requiring regular reading, writing, and academic discipline. Though his parenting style was firm, it contributed to stabilizing her academic trajectory. During this period, Oprah began to channel her energy into performance and communication. She joined school activities such as debate and drama, where she discovered that speaking publicly gave her both confidence and visibility. For the first time, she experienced recognition not based on survival, but on skill. However, this stage of her life also included profound personal difficulty. As a teenager, she experienced a pregnancy resulting from earlier abuse, which ended in the death of her infant shortly after birth. This traumatic event intensified her emotional burden, introducing grief layered with confusion and self-blame. Yet, even in this period of hardship, she continued her education and began to move toward opportunities in media. First steps into media and the power of voice. Oprah's entry into broadcasting began unexpectedly through a local speaking competition. Her natural communication skills and emotional expressiveness distinguished her from other participants, earning her early recognition and opportunities in radio. At a young age, she began working part-time in broadcasting, reading news, and developing on-air presence. This early exposure to media was transformative. It allowed her to convert personal vulnerability into expressive strength. Her ability to speak with authenticity resonated with audiences even before she fully understood the scale of her talent. Unlike traditional broadcasters of the time, she brought emotional depth and relatability to her delivery, which made her stand out in a rapidly evolving media landscape. Her early career also reflected a broader social shift. As a young black woman entering a predominantly white and male industry in the 1970s, she faced structural barriers. However, her persistence and adaptability enabled her to move from local radio to television opportunities in larger markets. Each step in her early career reinforced a central realization: her voice was not only a personal tool, but also a professional asset capable of connecting with large audiences. Chicago breakthrough and the reinvention of daytime television. Oprah's major career breakthrough came when she was offered the opportunity to host a struggling morning talk show in Chicago. At the time, the program was performing poorly in ratings and lacked clear identity. Her arrival marked a turning point. Within weeks of taking over, she redefined the tone of the show. Rather than adhering strictly to traditional formats, she introduced emotional openness, audience engagement, and conversational authenticity. Viewers responded immediately, and ratings improved dramatically. What had been a failing program quickly transformed into a cultural phenomenon. This success led to national syndication and the creation of her own show, which would eventually become one of the longest-running and most influential talk shows in television history. Over the next 2 decades, she built a media empire that included production companies, publishing ventures, and eventually a dedicated television network. Her approach fundamentally changed daytime television. Instead of superficial entertainment, she focused on personal stories, emotional truth, and social issues. This shift redefined audience expectations and expanded the boundaries of what talk shows could address. The psychology of survival. How trauma shaped drive, identity, and control, one of the most defining but least visible elements of Oprah Winfrey's life, is the way early trauma influenced her psychological development and long-term behavior. Her childhood experiences were not just isolated events of suffering, they became formative forces that shaped how she understood safety, control, trust, and identity. In environments where protection was inconsistent and emotional security was fragile, children often develop adaptive strategies to survive psychologically. In Oprah's case, those strategies included hyper-awareness, emotional self-reliance, and a powerful drive to create structure where none had existed before. Her later obsession with productivity and achievement can be interpreted through this lens. Building systems, producing content, and maintaining control over her media empire were not just professional goals. They were also psychological anchors. Work became a space where unpredictability could be replaced with order, and where vulnerability could be transformed into influence. This is a pattern often observed in individuals who have experienced early instability, the need to construct environments that feel safe through mastery and control. At the same time, her emotional intelligence, her ability to connect deeply with guests and audiences, can also be traced back to her early life. Having grown up in situations where emotional signals mattered for survival, she developed an acute sensitivity to tone, pain, and unspoken feeling. This allowed her to connect with people in ways that felt unusually personal for mass media. Her interviews were not just conversations, they were emotional exchanges that often revealed hidden layers of human experience. However, this emotional openness came with a cost. Constant engagement with trauma narratives, both her own and others, meant that emotional boundaries were frequently blurred. Over time, this contributed to periods of exhaustion, introspection, and emotional fatigue. Even success did not fully resolve this internal tension. Instead, it created a paradox. The more she helped others process pain, the more she was reminded of her own unresolved history. Legacy beyond wealth, influence, contradiction, and the human aftermath of greatness. When evaluating Oprah Winfrey's legacy, it is tempting to focus solely on measurable achievements, her financial success, media dominance, and cultural impact. However, her true legacy extends beyond statistics or accolades. It exists in the way she changed public conversations, redefined emotional expression in media, and expanded the boundaries of what personal storytelling could accomplish at scale. She helped normalize discussions around subjects that were once considered private or taboo, including abuse, trauma, identity, and healing. In doing so, she contributed to a broader cultural shift in which vulnerability became a form of strength rather than shame. This influence extended into education, policy, and social awareness, shaping how millions of people understand their own experiences. Yet her legacy is also marked by contradiction. While she built a platform centered on emotional authenticity, she also had to maintain a highly controlled public persona. While she promoted openness, she lived much of her life under intense public scrutiny. While she advocated for healing, she continued to navigate her own unresolved emotional history. These contradictions do not diminish her impact, they humanize it. Another important aspect of her legacy is the question of cost. Great influence often requires personal sacrifice, and Oprah's life reflects that reality. Privacy, emotional simplicity, and ordinary anonymity were largely absent from her experience. Instead, her life became a continuous negotiation between public expectation and private identity. This tension is central to understanding the emotional complexity of long-term fame. In later years, her legacy has increasingly shifted toward reflection rather than expansion. Education initiatives, philanthropy, and mentorship have become more central than media production. This transition suggests a movement from building influence to shaping continuity, investing in people who will carry forward aspects of her work beyond her lifetime. Public revelation, advocacy, and cultural impact. In the mid-1980s, Oprah made a pivotal decision to publicly disclose her experiences with childhood abuse during a televised discussion. This moment marked a significant turning point in her public identity. She was no longer just a media host, she became a voice for survivors of trauma. The response was immediate and widespread. Viewers across the country began sharing their own experiences, many for the first time. This created a cultural shift in how abuse and trauma were discussed in public discourse. Her platform became a space for validation and awareness, helping reduce stigma around previously taboo subjects. Her influence extended beyond media into public policy. She later testified before government bodies in support of legislation aimed at protecting children and improving systems for tracking offenders. These efforts contributed to meaningful legal reforms. However, this openness also came with personal consequences. Her revelations strained certain family relationships and exposed private conflicts to public scrutiny. Despite this, she continued to prioritize advocacy, using her platform to address issues such as inequality, education, and systemic injustice. OWN Network, Failure and Professional Reinvention. After decades of success in syndicated television, Oprah launched her own network with the goal of creating a fully independent media platform. The venture represented a significant financial and professional risk. Initial expectations were high, but early performance fell short of projections. The network struggled with ratings and financial losses in its early years. This period represented one of the most challenging phases of her career. For the first time in decades, she faced sustained public criticism and uncertainty about her professional direction. Despite setbacks, she remained actively involved in restructuring the network. Over time, programming changes and strategic adjustments improved performance, and the network eventually stabilized. This experience marked a shift in her professional identity, from unstoppable success to resilient adaptation in the face of failure. Philanthropy and educational legacy. Throughout her career, Oprah dedicated significant resources to philanthropy, particularly in education. One of her most notable contributions was the establishment of a leadership academy for girls in South Africa, designed to provide high-quality education to students from disadvantaged backgrounds. Her philanthropic work reflects a consistent theme in her life, transforming personal hardship into opportunities for others. She has also contributed to scholarships, disaster relief, and educational initiatives in underserved communities. While her philanthropy has been widely praised, it has also been subject to public debate about the role of wealth and private giving in addressing systemic inequality. Regardless of perspective, her contributions have had measurable impact on thousands of lives. Later life, reflection, and emotional complexity. In her later years, Oprah has spoken more openly about reflection, aging, and emotional complexity. Despite immense wealth and global recognition, she has acknowledged moments of loneliness and introspection. Her life, though outwardly extraordinary, remains shaped by early experiences that continue to influence her emotional world. She maintains a relatively private lifestyle compared to her public career, focusing on wellness, meditation, and selective professional engagement. Her relationships and daily routines reflect a shift toward balance rather than expansion. This stage of her life highlights an important truth. Achievement does not erase memory. Even at the height of success, individuals often carry internal narratives shaped by their earliest experiences. Conclusion: The cost and meaning of a legendary life. Oprah Winfrey's life is not a simple narrative of triumph over adversity, but a layered human story defined by resilience, complexity, and contradiction. She rose from conditions of extreme hardship to become one of the most influential media figures in history, reshaping global conversations about trauma, identity, and empowerment. Yet her journey also illustrates the emotional cost of sustained visibility and ambition. Public success did not eliminate private struggle. Instead, it coexisted with it, often intensifying the weight of memory and expectation. Her legacy is therefore dual in nature. She represents both extraordinary achievement and enduring humanity. She transformed personal pain into public purpose, creating platforms that allowed millions of others to speak. At the same time, her story reminds us that influence does not guarantee emotional resolution. Ultimately, Oprah Winfrey's life is not defined solely by wealth or fame, but by persistence in the face of overwhelming odds and the ability to convert silence into voice. Her story continues to resonate because it reflects a universal tension between who we become and what we carry with us along the way.